Hi, I'm Terry White, and you're watching Western Bass TV.
I'm Chris Raza, and you're watching Western Bass TV.
And, you know, we've had a lot of people, we have a lot of great fishermen on this tank. And today I'm going to, rather than try to show you what throwing baits out there and what they do, I'm going to tell you the type of, how to rig these baits and the reasons for different things and the colors. I do these seminars all over the country teaching finesse fishing. And I think what happens a lot of times, you know, we have a lot of new fishermen here. We've got a lot of fishermen that want to get into the sport. And we start talking about drop shotting and Carolina fishing and split shotting and doodling and whatever. But, well, how do we rig these things? How do you tie the hooks? What do you call that bait? How long a leader do you make? What kind of sinkers do you use for depth? What colors do you fish with? I think that's the little things that you all want to learn too. You know, just to throw a bait in a tank ain't going to get it. And if I keep shutting this mic off, I'm going to get mad. I can't even stick it in my pocket. But I got a good show for you. We're going to use the whole hour. And when I'm through, there's 3 things in this sport that you have to learn. There ain't no magic. Time on the water, location, presentation. There ain't no magic bait. If there was, I wouldn't be selling it. Keep it for myself. Get your wife involved in the sport. Very important. Or your girlfriend. Because when you do that, you can buy a lot more tackle at this show. Those are the things that are important. Now, electronics is location. I teach electronics all over the country. Next week I'll be in Cincinnati and Pennsylvania. I have a show here at 3 o'clock. You can learn everything you want about fishing, but if you can't find them, you ain't catching them. You spend all the money in the world. If you don't get on them, you ain't going to catch them. Learning your electronics, you'd be surprised how many good fishermen in the country don't really know what they're looking at. I got a show at 3, so I'm going to try to show you tactics today and rigging, and at 3 I'll show you how to read your meters. If you have any questions, some of the knot tying I can't do up here. I have a little table down this aisle here, down about 3 or 4 tables down. I will be glad to show you individually how to tie the knots for drop shotting or any other questions you may have. First thing, we want to talk about some baits. We're getting into the springtime, and the 2 best baits that you can ever fish in the spring is a tube bait. The first 2 baits were designed by a man named Bobby Garland 35 years ago. Mr. Garland made the biggest mistake of his life by not patenting that gets it. Now there's 7 million versions of the tube bait. But the tube bait in the springtime is one of the finest baits you can fish. If you have to pick one bait to fish, it'd be the tube bait. This is a Berkeley 3-inch power tube, and this is a Berkeley 4-inch flipping tube. I'm going to show you some real neat things to fish, and real simple. You want to fish a couple colors in the spring. Now this year, because we got a lot of dirty water, the Lord has been blessed us with a lot of rain and filling our lakes, and we're going to have a great spring. So when you got the dirty water, you go to the chartreuses. But when that water starts clearing up, if you got to carry one color, you carry pumpkin pepper green. That'll work anywhere, anytime in the springtime. You don't need to get a ton of colors. If you got dirty water, get something with chartreuse in it. This is what we call the tube baits. This here is called a little bungee. This is a little finesse jig. And it's got a little bungee trailer. Berkeley makes this bungee in 3, 4, and 5 inch. I like it a lot because it's got a little action on the tail. This is a little finesse jig that a friend of mine makes. And the combination in the spring, especially on bed fish, is deadly. Well, I'm going to show you a tactic in the tank here that's really something on bedding fish. These are little drop shot sinkers. These are made out of brass. They're real sensitive and they're a lot cheaper than tungsten, and I think they're better. This is a rubber nail. We do a lot of Carolina fishing and split shotting. We use what we call a Projo system, which was brass version of the Mojo. And you just use these little rubber nails, and you just stick the rubber nail in like so, trim it off. You don't have to worry about nothing. You can move it wherever you want. I'll show you that in a few minutes. How many of y'all fish Senkos? I'm going to show you how you save a lot of money. You take this little rubber nail and you stick it into the hole of the hook, like so. And this is a Senko. If you ever look at a Senko, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see this little bend here? That's really important where you put this hook. You put this hook on this side. Why? When it's falling, it's going to do this a lot more. You got a clipper? Anybody got a clipper? I left my scissors at my table.
Got a knife.
Go on, would you go get that yellow scissors? That's my son there. I got my granddaughters here. I'm going to show you something here. I left my scissors on the table. This here is a little clip. You all know when you're drop shotting, how many times that little sinker gets all tangled up on your rod. This little clip, you just put it on your rod like so, and all you have to do is stick it in there like that, and you're not going to have to worry about the sinker flapping all over the place. You also can use it for your Senkos and Sluggos. Rather than having to take your Senko and take the hook out and hook it up here, you can hook it down here. It works really neat. It was a guy named Stan Vandenberg came up with this idea, and you'll be seeing them in Cabela's pretty soon. I just got them in Cabela's. I really like it because that's been a real problem for us. Thank you, son. What you do, you trim this little nail off like so. You make it like a little cross, and then you take that hook and you rig it just like you always do, and then you put that rubber nail goes right into the plastic. You are not going to tear that Senko. Gary Yamamoto don't like me showing things like this, but you can use this on your plastic worms. You can see how I can pull that. You're not going to tear that Senko, and you know what they cost. You can use it on plastic worms. It's just what happens is the rubber locks into the plastic. Your toothpicks tear, monofilament tears. When they get the offset hooks, they tear. You put that little rubber nail in there and you're going to save a lot of money. That's just a neat little trick to show you. What I did here is a lot of versions of what we do. We have the Carolina fishing with the Projo sinker where you can move it where you want. We have the brass and glass that I developed years ago. Then we have the drop shot. I try to put it all on one string. Probably would work fishing it that way too. You see what I've done now? This is a little minnow made by Gulp. Berkeley's come out with some new Gulp baits that are really good. The only thing is you got to keep them wet. You don't want them to stay out in the sun. It's like pork, they'll dry up. This is a little Gulp minnow. The first thing I'm going to do, Carolina fishing these tube baits. You're going to see something that's phenomenal here in a minute, how these tubes will come up and float. First thing you're going to do is when you go out to buy a good rod and reel without spending a lot of money. You want to first get started in the sport of bass fishing, you get you a good rod, a rod that has a fast tip and a strong butt end here. That's what you're looking for. You don't want to buy a flipping stick to fish 7-pound test or 8-pound test or 6-pound test. See the fast tip and the strong butt end here. This is a rod I designed that Phoenix makes for me. These are ambassadors. These are their new 772s and 672s and 770s. Ambassador, in my mind, is still the best equipment you can use, but there's still a ton of good spinning reels on the market. What do you look for? A big spool, so you have a good drag, and you want a nice, smooth drag. Those are the things you look for in a spinning reel. Get a good rod with a fast tip, and when you're looking through the show or when you go out, always bring your spinning reel. Put the line through. Don't try just bending the tip, because all you're going to do is probably break the tip. You're not going to get the action. Run the line through so you can get the action. That's important. So you get you a good rod, get you a good spinning reel with a big spool and a good drag. Those are the important things. Now this is that Projo system I was telling you about. And when you put that rubber nail in, you can move that wherever you want. Whether you're trout fishing, bass fishing, or whatever. It's the neatest thing in the world. This is a cylindrical bait sinker. It's made out of brass. And it'll never close, where lead gets bounced around and the hole's closed. This here, it was a new power tube, and it's got a hook buried inside. Now I can't use hooks, I had to cut them off, so I pegged this with that little rubber nail. I want you to see some. Fishing this bait, you need to fish a pumpkin pepper green. I didn't have any of that color, but I'll just put this one on. I want to show you what this does in the tank. Remember, most of the bites you get in bass fishing are on a sink. Just think about that. So a suspended bait is what you want to try to get out there, or keep a bait off the bottom as much as possible. Watch this. Watch that tube. Now I'm going to move that tube. And all you have to do is reel it real slow. You get a little bite, you set the hook. This is a simple bait to fish. If you watch the bait, it'll just kind of float up like it's real. If you had to take one bait this time of year to fish, would be a tube bait on a Carolina rig. Now rigging this, I can show you on the table how to do it. You don't need to go spending $1,000 on baits. You get some good tubes, a good hook, some sinkers, good rod and reel, and some good line. I use this new transition. Again, there's a lot of good lines on the market. This is what I use, Berkeley's transition, and I really like it. In the sun, it turns yellow. When it hits the water, you can't see it. And all you have to do is throw this out and reel it back slow, or drag it. It's a great out. Give your kids, you know how your kids like casting and retrieving? Don't ever let your wife drag this behind the boat. It'd be very dangerous, because she'll outfish you. Again, I'm going to throw it out again. Just watch the bait, how the sinker will take it down, and then it just kind of floats. See how it's coming up now? I mean, you get a bait to do that, even these fish are going to look at it, because it's different. Just bring it back slow is all you got to do. Throw it out way out there again. Again, there's no magic. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. Just throw it out. Let it go to the bottom. When it hits the bottom, watch it come back up. That makes it as natural as you can be. And then all you got to do is just retrieve it. And bring it back. And when you get a bite, the bite will be like a rubber band. You can teach somebody to fish it like with a rubber band. Have them pull a rubber band, you're either stuck or you got a fish. The other tube I like using is a 3-inch power tube in pumpkin pepper. I got a lot of neat things to show you all, and you can see the way I go about teaching this. Rather than just throw a bait out there, I'm going to tell you how to do it, what it has to do, and the colors you need. Now fishing in the spring, 1/8 ounce sinker to 5/30 seconds is all you need. 5/30 seconds, sometimes 3/16 if the wind's blowing pretty hard. But you see, you can get a little bags of tubes, a couple of sinkers, some rubber nails, and a good rod and reel. The hook inside is a number 2 owner finesse hook. This is a pumpkin pepper green one. This is a really good color in the springtime. I'm just going to retrieve it, keep the tip down, and retrieve it real slow. Just kind of move it. See what I'm doing with it. Just kind of swim it. And when you get these fish to look at it, you can get anything to look at it. He had it there. Here's my point is, you can throw all kinds of baits out here. These fish are pretty sophisticated. But if I can get them to look at this, you can catch them in a toilet. And they're looking at it. And I ain't started yet. I got a lot of stuff. I throw it back out, let it sit there a minute, get their attention, and then just kind of reel it back slow. Just keep it moving. And you feel that little rubber band bite. Sometimes you can just let it sit. They'll stick their nose down and take a look at it. See how that thing is floating there? Where else can you get a bait doing that? Even the sophisticated bass are going to look at it. And that's what you want. You want a bait to be natural. You don't want to go into the bottom and stand there. Again, this is a very simple technique. It's easy to use. You don't need to spend a lot of money. And this time of year, we're getting into where that is a killer. And then when you're done with this little clip, you just put in the clip, and you're finished. This is what we call the drop shot rig. Now, when you're fishing the drop shot this time of year, 8 to 10 inches from the hook to the sinker. There's more than enough. This is a little ball brass drop shot sinker. They're very sensitive. This is a little 3-inch Berkeley bungee. About 8 to 10 inches. This is an owner number 1 or 1/0 hook in there. Remember I told you about the drag. You get a rod that has a drag like that, that's the kind of reel you want. Nice and smooth. This is my favorite reel here, this blue one. This is their new 772. It ain't that expensive either. Again, this is one of my rods I designed for Phoenix. But there's a lot of good rods out there. You just get one that do what I told you. Now, fishing a drop shot, and there's been a lot of guys up here teaching this. Just throw it out. A lot of times, fishing the drop shot, you don't even want to shake it. Just let it sit there a minute and barely move it a little bit. See what I'm keeping it off the bottom, but I ain't shaking it a lot. You don't really want to shake it too much. And just kind of move it along. You see that little bait? You can use worms on this. You can use just about anything you want. I got another rig I'm going to show you in a minute. But you can fish a drop shot in 3 foot of water, and you can fish it in 70 foot of water. When I'm guiding at Diamond Valley, I catch a lot of fish at 60 and 70 feet. But you got to make sure you learn how to use the needle. You notice a lot of guys are just knocking the heck. You can do that with doodling, but with drop shot, you're keeping the bait off the bottom. I brought the drop shot here from Japan in 1985, and I brought it to Chicago. It was the first show I did with Hank Parker, and I told him about how I brought this from Japan, and this is going to be the next hot technique. You know, right now it's the flavor of the month. Just remember, all these other things catch fish too. But what happened, those guys, they thought I was some kind of perch jerker. So I went back to Chicago last year, and I said, how many guys were here when I told you about it and didn't pay attention to it? And there was a bunch. But when you're fishing the drop shot, you don't really even have to shake it much, because, you know, let the water do all the work. Just let it sit there and just kind of move it a little bit, like I'm doing now. And a lot of times, the currents in the water, especially in the thermocline, which I'll teach in my electronics show, is where the fish are going to be anyway. And let the current in the deeper water, just let it do its thing. It's more natural than sitting there shaking the heck out of it. You can use a lot of different baits on this. I'm going to take this off. This is called a 3-inch bungee. and I'm going to put this little minnow. This is a new gulp minnow, and I like this thing a lot. It almost feels like it's alive. But the problem with fishing the gulp baits is make sure you keep them wet, because they shrivel up just like pork. But this little minnow, I mean, that's what it's really a neat little bait, and it's a great bait for fishing deep. Just keep pushing it like so. You can shake it just a little bit. This is called a minnow, and a lot of times in the deeper water they'll eat something like this, because like at Diamond Valley has a lot of minnows, not just shad. And again, when you're through, you just take this, flip it in a little clip, and you're done. This next technique is my favorite, especially when you're bed fishing. This is a bait cast version of my split shot and doodle rod. I like these. This is a new Ambassador that has a new flipping on it. And what I like about the flipping is when you're fishing deep or you're swimming a jig, you don't have to click it. You just the only thing you got to remember to do is keep your thumb down when you're casting. But when you throw it out, it instantly engage itself. And you let that jig just kind of work the bottom, and you let the bait on top suspend. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm just letting the bait suspend, and I let the jig do its thing. And you just barely move it, and you got the jig as a sinker, and you got the bait. And when you get this in, especially if you keep this thing in a bed, you just keep shaking that little jig, and the gets it is sitting up off the bed. And a lot of times they'll just come up and nail that gets it. Now I catch a lot of times, what'll happen is you'll be fishing, you'll catch a fish on the top bait, and you'll find another one swimming in with it. Just leave it in the water and you'll catch them both. I've done that, not a lot of times, but I've done it enough. What I like about this too, you can use worms. Well, I like this little jig because it not only acts as your sinker, it acts as a weed guard. And the gets it being suspended, you can see how that jig will hit the bottom, but the gets it stays off the bottom, which I think is really the key to catching a lot of suspended fish, especially educated ones. Now just let that thing sit a minute, and you just kind of shake it a little bit like a crawdad, and it'll get their attention. You see, I'm not shaking it hard. I'm just letting that gets it kind of do its thing. And you notice when it's moving along, if you watch that little jig down there, it looks just like a crawdad because I'm not shaking it very hard. Just barely moving it. Now put it up on that rock. I can't quite see that rock, but I like to use a bait caster myself. This is a bait casting 6.2 with a fast tip. Again, I'm using transition, and that's this new Berkeley Abu Garcia 4007. You see how I'm working that? And when you get these fish on a bed at Clear Lake, I fished the Bassmaster, you want to use chartreuse. Chartreuse is a great bed color. And what you do is you see the fish on the bed, like if that white rock is the bed, just let that jig go down, and just wait a minute and just start shaking a little bit. Always keep it in the sweet spot though. That's important. You keep that thing in the sweet spot. The sweet spot is where they're guarding those eggs. And you'll notice when it does get in the sweet spot, they're going to try to push the jig away, and then they eat the gets it. Because the gets it suspended. Now you can put a lot of different baits up here besides the gets it. I'll put this is a big flipping tube. It's almost too big for this, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. Or you can use your own worms. You know, plastic worms of all kinds. There's so many plastic worms on the market, you can go nuts with that too, but in the springtime, chartreuses and pumpkins will work every time. I'm putting a big one on there now. You can see how this big one will float. Just going to let it sit there a minute and just let it float on its own. And that's what you want. You want a bait to float, but the whole key to drop shotting is keeping the bait off the bottom. And a lot of times you don't even have to move it. Just sit there and hold it a minute, just like this, and just let it do its own thing, especially if you're moving real slow with the trolling motor. It works really, really good. I've caught so many fish with the jig and gets it. You notice how that gets it just kind of follows that jig, especially when you get next to structure. I'll throw it way down there. I like the 3-inch power tube myself, but I thought I'd see what I just did then, and you can't forget to do that, is keep your thumb on that trigger. But I really like the flipping triggers when I'm fishing because it engages for me automatic. Now I'm engaged. The fish hits it now, I got him. Just let it sit there and just kind of move it along. And I'm just showing you now whether they look at it or not. This is a deadly technique. And you can see how I go about teaching the things I'm showing you today. Rather than just throwing baits out there, I'm telling you what the bait is, what the color is, how to fish the color, what sinker size to use, and I'm showing you a lot of new baits. Now, springtime, there's a lot of ways to catch bass. We're going to have a great spring because we got a lot of high water and a lot of cover. Spinner baits are going to start working really good. But what I do is when I'm back east especially, I'll tell those guys, if you get a good spinnerbait bite going and all of a sudden the fish quit eating, then what you want to do is remember what I told you with the Carolina tube. The fish are still there. They're just not chasing anymore. So you take the Carolina tube and you fish because it's so subtle and it's suspended. You take the Carolina tube, throw it out, and just let it sit there a minute. Because the fish are still there, and then just retrieve it. If that fish is still in there, he's going to eat that tube. So don't give up on your spot. You can see how that tube is just floating around, and that's what you want it to do. Many times I've got on a spinnerbait bite, and I've had those fish not eat the spinnerbait, and I'll throw this tube in there on a Carolina rig, and I've caught them. I've done it many times. So don't give up on your spot because they're not eating the spinnerbait or even a jig. There's something about this tube rigged the way I showed you. It just catches them. And you notice when these fish here in this tank take a look at it, you can catch just about anything. And it's easy to fish it this way. And you can use different colors. You get a lot of dirty water, you're going to have to change colors a little bit. Chartreuse and oranges in dirty water. This time of year, 1/8 and 3/16 sinkers will work just fine. You get you a good spinning rod with a fast tip. And a lot of these riggings, I'm going to go back over to my table when I'm done, and I'm going to be able to show you how to tie the hook, how to rig it, answer any questions you got. What I've tried to do today is show you the type of hooks to get, the type of jigs, the systems that are simple to fish, not going nuts with all the highfalutin baits that are out there today. There's one thing you remember: the bass do not know who you are. They don't stick their head out of the water. They don't care if you're in a $50,000 boat or a kayak. It's the only thing that counts is what you threw at them and how you presented it. Now, when I'm through here, I'm going to come downstairs, and all the little kids and women, I got a present for you. Thank you very much.